I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Welcome. We're very happy to see you, and we apologize that you had to wait a few minutes, but hopefully it'll be a great discussion, and yeah, we can't wait. So we're going to just get through a few orders of business, and then we're going to jump right to Global Scholars. And the first is just to see if there are any comments from the public on any items that are not on tonight's agenda. Okay, hearing none, I'd like to ask for a motion to adopt the agenda for tonight.
So moved. Second.
All in favor? All right, motion carries. And next we're going to do something called the consent agenda, which is a bunch of business that we vote on that we get to see in advance, different contracts and sometimes personnel changes.
Report cards.
And so we see it in advance, and if there are any items anybody has any questions with, we talk about it, but if not, then we ultimately vote on it, and it's just a way to make the meetings more efficient since we can do a lot of the work before the meeting starts in our readings. So with that, I would ask for a motion to approve the item 6 consent agenda personnel, item 7 consent agenda special services, and item 8 consent agenda business.
So moved.
Second? Second. And any comments, anything love, otherwise? Okay, all in favor? Motion carries. So that brings us to the enjoyable part, which is everybody that's here with us today. Welcome, okay.
So we're going to just wait a second for...
Oh, sure.
Thanks.
We're gonna turn on the cameras.
Now you guys have alibis. Where you were. No one can say, where were you? Where?
Anytime you're ready.
They didn't bring them
Okay.
so they can watch them.
So welcome tonight. We have Melissa Stahl and Lisa Squadron and Jen Layden, who are our teachers in the Global Scholars Program. And we have our students who are in the program too, some juniors and some seniors, right? Okay. Some juniors and seniors. We're going to ask them to introduce themselves in just a sec. But what I wanted to say is Global Scholars is something that was a really great brain idea for Byram Hills. Mm-hmm. So we have a lot of very intense programs like science research, intense in that kind of research. And my predecessor, the superintendent, and Dr. Kaltenecker, and your chair people and teachers came together and said that they really wanted kids to have a different experience. And they thought that experience would include a greater global awareness, more project-based learning activities, and something that students can pick as a goal and strive toward. For a better understanding of either their own community or the rest of the world, and something that would benefit their own community or the rest of the world. So this was a brave launch in a district, a high-performing district, and we couldn't be happier with the results. We have been waiting to talk to you, so we're so excited to have you here tonight, and I'd like to ask, starting over here, that you introduce yourselves.
Hi, I'm Sarah Fackler, and I'm a senior. Should I talk about my project? Or
Not yet. We'll get to that.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah.
Hi, I'm Caroline Kelly, and I'm an 11th grader.
I'm Sophia G. Martino, and I'm in 11th grade as well.
I'm Victoria Tori Ganellis, and I'm also in 11th grade.
I'm Riley Sullivan, and I'm a senior.
And we're going to jump into this. So I'm going to give just a little background information again that you've seen before, but just to remind our public about Global Scholars, and then we'll jump right into the conversation, and we hope you'll just jump in and ask them questions and hear about their projects and ask them what they're learning, and it's pretty incredible stuff. So just briefly to talk about this, why we're doing Global Competence is we know that technology has really changed the world. First, we say that the world is our library. Because of technology, we have access to all types of information we didn't have access to a couple decades ago or even 10 years ago. And the world is our neighborhood. We can now communicate with anyone across the world at any time. And so it's really gotten us to think differently about the world. Also, the second reason why is that we are moving from the information age to the innovation age. And as a result, that's requiring new skills and knowledge that our students need to be successful in the world. So what is global competency? We have a couple goals for ourselves in this program. One is we want kids to be more aware of international issues, and we want students to continue to explore what we have been working on for almost 2 decades now, which is cultural proficiency, having more knowledge about different types of people. We also believe that students should dive into world languages and also develop, again, more competitive skills, global skills to be competitive in the world market. And we developed a 3-year program with our amazing teachers. I also want to give credit to Mr. Smith, who couldn't be here tonight, but has been as involved from the ground up as well, and teaches the students as well. So we have a few goals. We want to provide students with opportunities to study in-depth issues that are interdisciplinary issues and real-world issues, to investigate these global issues, analyze them from different perspectives, and to be able to communicate their ideas effectively. And our goals are to develop global awareness, critical thinking and problem solving, and develop their leadership skills as well. We use 2 frameworks. You might hear the students reference some of the competencies in both of these. One is from the Asia Society and one is from World Savvy. We can explore that and unpack that a little bit when we talk about the skills they're learning. And then we'll talk a little bit about the content. We're in year 2, and these students are all in the year 2 program. So they've been through year 1. And part of year 1, the content is driven from the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, and you'll hear them reference those a little bit in tonight's presentation. And we can talk a little more, and I'll ask Jen Layden to talk about the year 1 and year 2 curriculum.
Sure. So using the frameworks of the skills and then the content of the UN Sustainability Goals, we developed 4 big units, which you heard about last year. Global competency, economic development, human rights, and the environment. And they're surrounded by big, big questions, and we have the kids explore them, but we look at them from our different disciplines. So whether it be more cultural intelligence, world language, philosophy, English, and more sort of social science. So how do you sort of examine these issues in different ways? And then in year 2 of the program, it's very individualized. So the curriculum is really involves the questions that the kids first have to pick a topic that really engages them, and they have to think about, why am I engaged in this topic? And then they have to start to plan, well, what can I do to make a difference? How can I plan my actions? What are the methods and strategies that I could develop that would effectively make a difference? Who can I partner with in order to make that difference, whether it be an individual, an organization, or otherwise? And then how can I evaluate my success? And so our guys are now sort of in that process where they've set goals and objectives, they've developed strategies and methods, and now they're working through trying to begin that implementation of that plan, as well as starting to evaluate their success and make changes along the way.
So let's talk first about year 1. You heard them about midpoint. At this point, we had a conversation with some students. We're halfway through year 1. So now that you finished year 1, could you talk a little bit about your takeaways from year 1? What did you walk away with? What were some of the things you learned? Anyone who wants to jump in? Who wants to be first?
I guess I'll start. So one of the biggest things I took away last year was like discussion skills. Because in the class we did a lot of like group discussions, which you don't really experience a whole lot in other classes. Like for example, we did fishbowl discussions, but one group's on the inside and the rest is on the outside. And like it really helped me like learn like how to like appropriately like discuss something in a respectful manner and allow for others' opinions and be able to know when to come in and not.
So when you learn those things, how do you learn them in the classroom? What's the learning experience like? And did you see yourself change at all from the beginning of the year to now?
I think I definitely saw, yeah, a big change for me because in the beginning I was a little like awkward and I wasn't really sure when to jump in and like if I was including relevant information to the discussion. But definitely at the end of the year I had a better sense of like how discussion runs and works. And we even in the beginning of the year we created like rules for discussions and how they should be like run appropriately. And I think just through a lot of experience, we did a ton of them for every unit and even in many units in them. So I think just through that experience, it really helped me.
Go on.
Just to probably offer that, do you feel that that helped you in your other classes as well? Do you find you using those same skills?
Yeah, for sure. I definitely, especially last year, we did like a lot of Socratic seminars in English, and it definitely like I felt so much more confident going into them having this background.
Tim, just if I could ask one question. So this is a unique program because it's interdisciplinary. So it takes different disciplines, puts them together, and I'm just curious how that feels from a student perspective. Like, do you see the difference compared to your other classes that might be English only, math only, social studies only, and what did you learn from that interdisciplinary experience?
I can go. Yeah, so I really love world language, and obviously having Miss Stahl and we did mini unit actually with world language, and every kid, whether they took Spanish or not, we spoke in Spanish and only in Spanish about our issues and issues throughout the world. So I think that was something really cool. So you didn't just have your Spanish class, but you were actually applying what you learned in Spanish and what Ms. Stahl and our other teachers were teaching us about the world around us, and that was how we were applying that specific skill. And I think that's something that's really important that you don't necessarily get in a strictly math-based class or a strictly language-based class.
Any other thoughts on the interdisciplinary approach?
It keeps the course, like, I don't want to say like entertaining, but like you're really never bored in the room because everything you're doing is always going to be different. Like in the first year, whether it's listening to a song and learning how that connected with what was going around the world, or speaking in Spanish about like I take Spanish, but like the vocabulary we're using was nothing I was ever exposed to before, because it's all very specific to like global climate or like issues around the world. So that, and then or just reading articles and discussing them, like everything you were doing was always very different every day. So there's always something that you could look forward to, like not knowing what was going to happen that day.
I remember last year when we heard about this program, it sounded like you guys were in college already. It's fantastic. But do you find yourself, now that you're in year 2, taking a lot of this with you? In other words, you're working outside the classroom, working in your house with your friends, really still focusing on this project day to day, whether you're in class or not. That with the work you're doing here is carrying through to your life.
I don't know if the work I'm doing is carrying my everyday life, but it's definitely something I'm thinking about for the future. It's even made me think about possible college majors as a senior, as I'm applying to college. A lot of what I'm thinking about doing for the future actually was related to the project and started in the past 2 years. So my project, sorry to get ahead, but just has to do with science and international relations. And those are both 2 majors I'm thinking about in the future. So I think it's definitely carried over to other aspects of my life, which is really cool.
Well, I just see Sarah, Sino-African relations and debt, which is a terrific topic. It really is. It's a fantastic topic. How did you come to that?
I think that part of it is the interdisciplinary approach of the class, because I was just paying attention to the news a lot more often because it just helps so much in class. We're going to talk about what's happening no matter what, so it's kind of gives you become better equipped to find credible resources and credible sources and just diverse perspectives, and it just becomes easier to read the news, especially at a time where it can be confusing because the information is so accessible. So that's how I kind of like, I don't want to say fell in a rabbit hole, but I definitely found myself learning a lot more about the situation of certain African countries. And then we even read, we read in the beginning of English actually, Poison and Bible and Heart of Darkness, and I remember connecting that to what I was reading in the news.
Joseph Conrad, right?
Yeah, and we, through just connecting those different concepts, I found myself interested in the issue and finding it relevant still today in ways people don't realize. So that's how that sort of interdisciplinary connection has brought me there.
I rarely talk about movies here, but there's a movie called The Girl in the Cafe. I don't know if you've ever seen that. The underlying thing is pain is debt, third world debt. It's a wonderful movie, so it may be interesting for you to see it.
And it's a good segue to talk now about year 2 and as you dive deeper into your project. So Sarah, since we're talking about your project now, do you want to give us your pitch on it? What are you studying? They all have practiced an elevator pitch.
Oh, yeah.
So that's part of the class as well. You'll hear about that experience.
So recently, China's been working on a project called the One Bridge, One Road Initiative, and it's sort of a restoration of the Silk Road. It's this big transcontinental trade project, and they've been giving huge loans to countries across the world so far to build infrastructure. So far, they've loaned to 50 of 54 African countries, a total of $86 billion since 2000, and they just pledged last year to spend $60 billion more. So that's an immense amount of money. That's about as much as Jeff Bezos is worth. The problem is, a recent study at Peking University found that 49 of 100 countries that China is active with these loans in are not suitable in terms of financial stability for these loans. So another aspect of this is that the American response to this has been rather aggressive recently, with Mike Pence bringing up another Cold War and focusing more on hostility towards China. This response also neglects African agency in taking these loans, and it has the potential to blow up in a really big way. So I've been working on spreading awareness about this issue among Americans. I think that is really more relevant than people realize. I've been recording podcasts and entering them in competitions, and I've been writing editorials, also submitting those to certain newspapers, and planning presentations and lessons to give at my school, so far in my Spanish class. And I also plan on contacting a Kenyan painter who has an exhibit on this issue to see what he has to say. Yeah, so I'm really excited to work on it.
Any questions about that?
What year did you pick your topic? In what year of the program did you pick your topic?
I picked it this year.
So that's your third year?
Second year.
September.
I live a boring life.
And you get a mentor to work with in this project, or you create the entire project?
Yeah, I've been creating it myself. I mean, I'm considering reaching out because it's like huge in terms of economics and background that I don't really have, I'm limited to. But yeah, so far it's been just my research.
But that differentiates, like for me, like I have a mentor, like I have someone who like, so mine's all about like architecture, and like I have like a mentor who's an architect in like third world countries. So it's like someone that I could like go to with topics that like are kind of beyond my knowledge. So I guess it depends on the person.
What goes into the decision-making process to find, you know, a project? Like, how do you work with the teachers, and what is that process like?
I think one thing that definitely Ms. Stone really emphasized was, why does it matter to you? And even if this obviously doesn't directly impact me, I found myself coming back to the issue and I kept connecting it to things I was learning in class, whether it was like history or English or even my foreign language class. I came to realize like, oh, this is something that I care enough about to take action for it.
Is this typical, or is she putting
Yeah,
in
no,
extra?
it's typical.
This amount of work is typical for what's involved in the
They're all
project?
doing different levels of, I mean, she has a serious topic, but Caroline's building solar panels and trying to get solar panels into a family's home in Uganda. So it's all based on their passion.
It'd be great to hear maybe from a couple others, you get a breadth of the subject of the
Why
group.
don't we go, Riley, I want to come back to you because we were talking about your project earlier. Can you give us your pitch and talk about why it's important to you?
So I'm promoting the Reach Every Mother and Child Act in Congress. So there's a very large and extreme healthcare disparity in the world. Thousands die every day to diseases that aren't seen in the United States. Like almost 5,000 people die every day due to tuberculosis. And a diagnosis of pneumonia in the US requires just a few antibiotic treatments to leave you symptom-free. There's a death sentence in other countries. So the Reach Every Mother and Child Act would give $3 billion of US State Department funds to combating this healthcare disparity and diseases in other countries. And this act would also establish a 5-year goal for ensuring healthy lives across the world by 2030. And the act would also establish standards for working with other countries and promoting a collaborative approach to this problem. So this act should be promoted for both humanitarian and economic reasons. So I believe that one life is worth the same if it's in the United States or if it's in another country, and empathy shouldn't be reduced with distance. And then there's also an economic factor for this act. So the United States sells about 90% of its goods to developed people, which is actually only 20% of the world. So if by reducing death rates in other countries, these countries are actually able to develop and their economies can expand, which would be so we would be able to sell our goods to these countries. So it'd be good for the United States economically to try to reduce death rates across the world. So I'm trying to increase the number of co-sponsors on the bill. Right now there's 49 co-sponsors. It's in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee.
United States Senate.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. So I believe if there's more co-sponsors in the bill, then there'll be an increased likelihood they'll be passed.
So your hope is to raise awareness amongst, to try to get more sponsors of the bill. And what are some things you're doing to go about getting sponsors?
So I wrote letters to the 51 senators who have not yet signed the bill. The letters are tending to vary if they're Democratic or Republican, have different arguments depending on the senator. But I've also created a petition. So every time someone signs the petition, a letter will be sent to each one of the 51 senators. So I'm exploring different ways to promote that petition and just other ways to increase public awareness about the problem and the bill.
You try to use social media in that? Is that part of what you try to do? How do you get those campaigns?
It was a very common theme that we've been developing is actually using Twitter. One of our friends in the class actually has gotten followed by a lot of Ugandan elected officials, right? So, that's definitely something we're all looking into, and something that's very cool to explore.
Asking to send money to Nigeria.
What is this housing in Vietnam?
Yes.
Let's talk about that, Tori.
So, ever since I was really little, I've always been super passionate about architecture. So when I joined this course, I knew right from the start that I wanted my project to be built around something to do with that, because that's what I want to do when I'm older. And through my research, I discovered that 7 out of 10 houses in the lowland regions of Vietnam are at very high risk of being destroyed in annual floods. And basically, Vietnam is technically a third world country, but very close to breaching that gap and no longer being impoverished. And I always wanted to know, like, what's holding them back, like what's preventing them from these people being able to live to a higher standard. And the biggest thing that I discovered was that their farming areas aren't being utilized to their biggest capacity. And the main reason for that is that the houses, so a family builds a house and then they farm their land, and then every year their house is being destroyed. So every year they're putting time and energy into rebuilding their house when that energy could be going into farming and boosting the economy. So every 2.2 jobs in agriculture, every job in agriculture creates 2.2 jobs in other sectors of their economy, which would boost their economy dramatically. So basically, my project is surrounded around researching how to build a house that's it's actually on bamboo stilts. It was like the house that I'm like looking into researching, because that's like plentiful in the area, and they're structurally sound and don't get destroyed nearly as easily in like water-based damage. So that's where my efforts have gone so far, is researching how to create this house. And then what I decided was implementing it isn't exactly something like in my realm of possibility. So I wanted to reach out to an organization that's already working in Vietnam. So I found Habitat for Humanity builds houses in Vietnam. And the issue with the houses that they build is that they're the same structure built in all countries that they implemented in. There's no regional specification. So what I wanted to do was actually be able to research and create a structure that they could use, and then be able to put that structure into Vietnam, because they're already working there, and it would actually end up benefiting the people significantly more than what's already being done.
How did you identify an outside architect to work with on this project?
He's my mom's cousin's best friend's husband.
There's a way.
I've met him a few times, and I've been on the phone with him for like hours at a time, and we email back and forth all the time, and he sends me like articles that he thinks I'd be interested in. And he doesn't specifically work in Vietnam, but right now he's working in Rwanda, building in a silver gorilla sanctuary. And he also works a lot in Costa Rica with houses that have to be able to deal with rainwater in like the rainforests. So he's not specifically in Vietnam, but he has a lot of experience with using materials that need to be like, that need to work well with the regions, and being able to work with people that may not be able to afford like the best materials. So he's someone that like can help me with just like roadblocks I come to, or asking questions about like actual structures and like what would work and what wouldn't.
And I imagine it's really important for each of you to talk to people outside of your class,
Definitely.
right? Whether it's a parent or a friend or a resource like that.
Was that something you had to learn? Was that easy for you?
Oh, not for me at all. I actually have pretty bad stage fright, but like Global Scholars has helped me a lot, like get over that, and just the idea of like talking to like an adult on the phone used to like freak me out, and now I'm able to get on the phone with like different people and talk to them as if like I feel like equal to them. So there's no longer like I don't feel like the age barrier that's like scary anymore.
And with these pitches, so I mentioned your elevator pitch, and you all sort of chuckled a little bit. So what's it like preparing for this, and what do you do in class to get ready to pitch your ideas?
I mean, every single one of our teachers had us do it somewhere between a 30-second to a 3-minute elevator pitch, and I think we were given a day, or even in Miss Stahl's class, I think you guys were given like 10 minutes to even come up. And that's what someone told me their class. And they were like, we were given like a very short amount of time to create these elevator pitches, and we basically came in the next day and we're like, okay, you're going, like, and they would just pick, and we would just have to give them, and then we ended up being graded on them. So now we just kind of know them off the top of our head.
We freaked out at first.
We did freak out.
Surprisingly, like everyone was able to realize that like you're talking about something that you've been studying for like half a year now, and you really know it well. So just talking about it like ends up being like not as hard as you thought it would be.
One of the things we really work on is feedback too. These guys are really good at giving positive feedback. We do warm and cool, and they really give critical feedback, because I think the environment is that's what you do when you're working with, we call each other our colleagues. We're working with our colleagues.
Our office.
If you want the work to be better, you've got to give some cool feedback, and they're really good at it.
And also to be receptive to that feedback.
And to knowing
Yeah.
why you're giving it, because you want the work to be better.
Right. So the first year is a general overview, and then the second year, everyone does their own project with group input.
Yep.
And they work on that project for 2 years, or?
Yeah, well, really, the one full year, and then the following year, they're going to continue that work, but they're also going to serve as leaders for the year 1 and 2 kids, too. Kind of serve as mentors.
And then does it sometimes involve travel, depending on the situation?
Yeah, well, really, we've left it up to the student, because depending on the project, some of them have looked into travel opportunities, some have looked into internship opportunities. We're sort of gearing it individually.
Or working with a
Kelly, are you
nonprofit.
going
Or
to
work with a
Uganda?
nonprofit.
Research based.
You might.
Well,
Yeah, why don't you give us your
Give it-
opinion,
Yeah, so
talk
for-
about what you're
Yeah.
experiencing
So
now.
after the first time I saw UNSDGs, I was instantly drawn to number 7, which is renewable energy, just because energy now is just so vital in our lives, between like cooking, charging our phones, and heating our houses. It's almost as important as food, water, shelter. But I found out that 1.3 billion people across the world who don't have access to electricity, which is completely amazing. And furthermore, 620 million people in Africa don't have access to energy, which I wanted to make a difference and like help move that goal to accomplish it more. So after looking, I focused in on Uganda, where 88% of people don't have access to energy, and I was able to work with a man named Simon, who he goes to school with Mr. Gilbert, who's a teacher in the high school, his nephew. So he's come in and he's talked to our classes, and he is a dean at a school in Uganda. And he's been like a huge resource for me. I was able to have a meeting with him in December because I can do as much research as I want, but talking to a person who's experienced and gone through everything was extremely helpful. We were able to talk about like what it's actually like to install a solar panel or run a solar panel, and like how it's impacted his community. And like he mentioned that how like not only does it like help with lighting a house, but the literacy rates at his school have gone up tremendously because kids will wake up 4 hours before school starts just to read. So it's had a huge impact on life there. And working with Simon, he connected me with a man who he bought his solar panels from in Uganda named Dennis. And I emailed with him and now to find out the prices, how installation would run, and other details. And so I've emailed with him, and then I've started a website where you can find out more information about my topic and its connections to other UNSDGs, and like to donate money to raise money for the solar panels. And also I talk a lot about the science behind solar panels, because that's another thing I was interested in, more of like kind of with the interdisciplinary program, focusing on the science aspect of it too, because that's something that interests me. So I'm working with collecting materials to actually build a physical solar panel, which I think would benefit my knowledge of the topic itself. So I've been emailing with Simon, and I'm working on getting all that stuff together. And then, because I've been really interested in like, going out there, and so I found a couple different, like maybe groups that could go into and implement solar panels. I have to see how they would work out in the summer and like applying to them. But Simon usually would say, he's like, I'd love to if you could come to Uganda and like see the people are impacting. And like, maybe like a year ago, I would have said like, oh, that's like completely ridiculous, like that could never happen. But like after like this, like it's still kind of crazy, but like maybe like it's not impossible. It's just change my mind. And like made me really excited, more excited for my project. I like not only have an impact, but see the impact I'm making.
You know, it's not fair that your best academic experience comes when you're in high school. It's supposed to come, but it sounds like you're each getting so much out of this project. Lori raised an interesting point about how the first year is, obviously you get to know the program, the second year you explore. But do you find the interaction with each other and the feedback you get from each other helpful? Do you find it annoying? Do you find it makes you a better advocate for what you're doing for your own project? Because it's not always easy to receive feedback, and it's a sign of maturity when you can receive it and know how to address it and work with it. But how's that coming out with you guys? Anybody can answer
It's
that.
definitely important and positive. I think the criticism I've got from my classmates really helped me make a more convincing argument for my project. So the bill I'm promoting was definitely seen in some ways as one side of a political spectrum. And talked to my classmates in Miss Layden, I developed different ways to argue to the other side. So I mentioned an economic benefit for this bill, which I didn't have originally. It was very humanitarian based, but then I began to learn how to argue to the other side and how to make it know that there'll be an impact for that individual. I think that was a very large part of the feedback I got from my classmates and teachers, which is cool. So it was definitely helpful for my project.
Sophia, you have a different project that might take place right here too, right?
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yeah, so when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, I was watching Netflix. I was watching a Netflix show called Bones. I don't know if you know that show, but it's basically about an FBI agent and a forensic anthropologist, and that kind of kickstarted my love for the criminal justice system and kind of seeing that that could potentially be a career option for me. And it's definitely something I've thought about, but when I came into Global Scholars, we had a final project last year, and I knew that I wanted to do it based on the criminal justice system, and I came across this statistic that has still stuck with me, and it's that 220,000 adults are sexually assaulted in prison every year. And that when I had to choose my topic for this year, I knew exactly what I wanted to do, and I decided to hone in specifically on women's prisons. And it's 33%, which is 72,000 women report actually being raped by a prison guard, and that isn't even the full number of people that it's not the true number, just because of the stigma and the retribution that they do face when they do report that incident. And so what I found on my research is that the problem is based on the training program that the guards receive, and it's strictly unisex and it's very male oriented because the majority of the prison population is male and not female. So what happens is when they are arrested and they are put in prison, they tend to not have access to educational opportunities and things that can help them when they get released to help support their families. And so they are taken advantage of because they don't necessarily know how to deal with being put in shackles and being put into solitary confinement, and just the mental toll that that takes on them, and the guards are able to exploit that, unfortunately. So my goal is to actually take the training program and implement corrections and the reforms that I believe need to be made in order to better serve the women. So that's kind of what I've been
It's a training program for the women, not for the guards.
No, for the guards, and so that they understand better how to actually treat the women as humans and not almost like, it's almost like
I'm wondering, only because my background is legal, certainly not, and nothing to do with the criminal justice system. But I would imagine that, being this is 2019, that there have been numerous civil rights lawsuits brought on behalf of prisoners who've been assaulted. And I'm wondering whether or not, if you research that, to see what steps prisons have taken in response to those lawsuits to increase training, to diversify their staff, what have you, because I would imagine there would be some significant issues there that would be relevant to your work, and also you just might find interesting.
There is one act, the Prison Rape Elimination Act, that was passed, I want to say in 2003, I could be wrong on the date, but it was meant to essentially reform the treatment of prisoners because they were being sexually assaulted, and so far what I found is that it hasn't really made as much of an impact as they originally thought it was going to. And in female prisons especially, the guards tend to be male and not female, so that's another aspect of the problem, is if you have a male who's guarding a female, you know, there tends to be a lot of problems with that, just in how their mental states and what.
Does the law require that if a woman is brought in for interrogation, question that a female guard has to be with the male prison guard at the same time? There's nothing like that.
There's nothing like that. They tried to, I know in specific prisons, they do have laws that say that a female is the only one that can do a strip search of another female inmate and stuff like that, or they have a 15-minute period when they're showering and when they're changing where the guard, if it's a male, can't look at them. Like they actually have to, they can't be present when they do that, just for the female's safety. But a lot of it, because it's so different based on federal, local, state, and private prisons, and just the rules and regulations that go along with that, that has everything to do with it as well.
And you found an agency to sort of partner with too.
I'm trying to work. I've emailed with one of their like senior advocacy directors, and she's given me a ton of resources on women specifically in prison. So I've been kind of taking notes on that and just emailing back with her.
When you guys are, when you're communicating, you know, with what you're talking about, and you talk about in Africa and everything like that, I assume this is all through the Byram email, right? And the teachers are they CC'd on it? I know science research is like that too, right? Like the Twitter handles and everything, is that not personal ones, right? But is that school ones?
Well, their emails are all through the account, and they all run the emails by us before they send it to make sure, you know, it seems appropriate, and they get advice and feedback on that as well.
Okay, and the responses too, are they forwarded to the teachers and everything too?
Yeah, they share all of that.
It's all, okay.
Caroline
It's all
shared
on-
with me that I got an email.
What about the website? She has a website that's
Right, exactly, and the
donations.
Twitter.
Right. That's on the using the Wix platform.
Yeah, which is through linked through the school account.
Okay.
So like science research, we also work with the students on communication and inappropriate communication. And the use of social media. and all that stuff.
We had one of my other students is working with the Organization Against Malaria to provide nets for women and children under 5 in sub-Saharan Africa, and she had to get a net sent to her. She was like, send it to my house. I'm like, no, send it to Melissa Stahl at Byron Mills High School. Okay. So we got this big package delivered to me and then she opened it. So we are making those precautions.
Okay, good. Right.
Well, I'd like to ask you a question, Ms. Stahl, since I never let you out of it without asking you a question.
I'm working with Chinese.
It's a long-standing joke. Now that this has gone on, what changes do you see or you thinking about for the program size, content, if any? I mean, is it too soon to think about changes to the program now? Or?
I think we're constantly refining. I think the difference between their year 1 and the year 1 that Lisa and I are teaching, there's been significant changes, and part of the reason is because the kids are very honest with their feedback to us. When we ask, how's it working for you? We just sent out a new survey for the current year 2s. How is this program working for you? Is it meeting your expectations? What could be done differently? And thankfully, they are as honest as they are with you, with us, and so we're able to make those refinements. Moving forward, you know, year 3 we haven't gone through yet. We have our ideas of how that's going to work. We'll continue to work with the kids on their feedback, plus adding the year 1 feedback that we have. It's that continuous loop. I think that there's certain areas, you know, we introduced cultural intelligence, which is basically the idea of cultural proficiency this year. Is they're wonderful at researching and investigating, but it's how do you deal with someone that's of a different culture than you, of a different socioeconomic status, and it's something that our year 1s really worked on this year, and they caught themselves saying, I want to ask this question, but it's going to come out wrong, and it's going to be offensive. I said, that's fine. It's a continuum when you're dealing with cultural proficiency, and the fact that you're aware of that and you have to think about how you're going to ask this question, you're learning. So that's an area that we're looking to go to.
And I think, I mean, we are learning based on what we're seeing. We're learning based on the feedback we're getting from the current year 2 students, from the current year 1 students, you know, and then thinking about, okay, like we have this idea of leadership for the year 3s. That's going to change year 1 too, because now we're going to have students in with the year 1 group, which we didn't have this year, we didn't have last year. So there's a lot of refining and tweaking and changing, as we were just talking about changes to the poverty unit for next year, you know, and that's, I mean, that's, you know, for next fall. So I think there's sort of the constant shift.
I imagine there's such a benefit of the students in year 1 learning from the older students, similar to the science research program where you have the mixed grade classes and kids become role models for the other kids. I think the learning happens quicker. I think there's that support as well for the work.
And it seems like there's a tremendous amount of interest in the freshman class to go into the program next year.
So next year our numbers are enormous. It's wonderful. It's a great problem to have. And every day a kid will come up to me and say, oh, I forgot to register. Can you add it to my course request? Sure, 1 more we can register. So we're working on that. I mean, obviously once the schedule is built, things do have a tendency to shake themselves out and we'll lose some of those numbers, but it's a robust program for our 1st, 2nd, and 3rd years next year.
And is there any kind of criteria to get into year 1, or it's open to anybody who wants?
No, you just have to have the period available. Just be interested.
What about board members? Can we?
You're more than welcome to stop by periods 1 through 4 every day. You can hit one of our Global Scholars class.
Wow, you guys really hit the jackpot here.
We're all here.
Well, look how you're able to explore a passion you have and do it through your school district. and do it on your school time and with the leadership of these fine women, this is a wonderful opportunity for you. Hopefully, you can turn your experience into writings, either articles or something else where really you can share it with the community at large and beyond, because I think it would be a shame if your experience and what you learned just stays with a small group. I think it should be shared. I think it's a wonderful opportunity you have.
How do you evaluate this? Like it's you know, it's such a unique, and each project is so unique.
Let them answer.
Like how do you, is there criteria that's set up for you guys in the beginning that says this is how you're going to be evaluated?
Yeah, we're given rubrics. So like, we'll have like smaller things like our elevator pitches where we're graded on a rubric of 1 to 4, and it's like, I can't remember off the top of my head, but like it's basically just like proficiency, like how well are you how are you getting the task done, and that's a grade. And then you have a grade at the end of the quarter, which is just like you're given how we did this quarter was midway through the quarter we were given a sheet of paper that said like basically assess yourself, like what have you completed, how have you completed it, what are the next steps you're planning on taking, and like how do you think you could improve what you've been doing. And then we're given an opportunity to then grow as a student in our second reflection, which is at the end of the quarter. So we completed ours last week, and you once again you say what you've done from the midpoint on, how you changed what you were doing before, how you fixed what needed to be fixed, and then the next steps you plan to take. And then we're graded. It's taking. I assume it's taken into account like the grades that we give ourselves, and then what she assigned Mrs. Landon, but what she thinks then based on how I worked day to day and how intense how diligent I was to get on myself to get everything done.
So it's very different than how you're assessed in typical classes. So what's that experience been like for you?
I mean, for me, it's been a little uncomfortable at times because it's not a traditional class where you like learn a bit of material in 1 week, and then at the end of the week you're taking an assessment on it. A lot of it is spread over a long period of time, and you have to learn how to block time off for yourselves and set mini deadlines. And a lot of like the grading that's done, I think, is based on your growth and how much you put into it is what you're going to get out of the program. And I think just that kind of like growth has really like influenced how I've like experienced the program.
You're ready for college with that kind of...
You have to be very accountable for what you're doing in the class.
That's really true.
It's up to you if you get your stuff done, because Ms. Dahl's not good. Like, she'll yell at you for not doing your work. But
very encouraging now.
But you really have to be on yourself and make sure that you're moving along at a pace that is like progressive.
There's a lot of project management in this, because now you're doing a year-long project as opposed to small little homework assignments or small-term projects. Has that been challenging for you to manage these projects with lots of pieces?
Focusing. We spent like a week or a couple of days really like learning like how to set manageable milestones for yourself, and like how to set mini goals, because one big goal could be a lot to like look at. Like it could be intimidating if you're looking at an entire project like solving poverty in Vietnam. Like, whoa, that's big. How am I going to break that down? And then we worked on like setting goals that you think could take you a month, and then within that, goals like what are you doing week to week, and then even more specific, what is your day to day? So we actually work as our class is like an office, and it's like you have 4 or like almost an hour in a day. Like, what are you going to get done in that hour, and then what are you going to get done in the 5 hours you have that week, and like how are you really going to make sure that you're using your time and making sure that you're like being able to check things off of a list, actually make sure you're getting somewhere. So just all the work that we did with that really helped me like make sure that I'm actually doing everything and to get something done. So it's not just like all time wasting stuff.
It's got to be very interesting to be on a different time schedule than everyone else around you, about what your goals are and how you're achieving them.
Are you still taking the traditional courses? Like, do they still take Spanish?
Yeah.
This, okay.
It's an elective.
English.
It's an elective.
Yeah. This is just one period a day.
That combines the different.
Yeah.
But it's an
But they're still
elective, so it
taking
doesn't replace any other class.
Do you have one teacher, or does everyone do the teachers rotate through?
Year one we rotated. Now we all this year we all.
No, they just have one of us. Although we kind of take turns.
Mr. Smith always comes into our class first period, and pokes around, asks
He comes in our fourth period.
and he goes and floats around. We're actually, one of the cool things that we're excited about, and we haven't even really talked to you guys yet, is that, so I teach period 1, Jen teaches period 3, and period 4, and Dwayne teaches period 3. The students haven't had a chance in year 2 to talk to each other from those different classes. I mean, if they're friends outside of class, so we're getting them together in February to have a World Cafe so they can talk about sharing their projects, because I have a student who's possibly going to submit a letter to a congressperson and change a bill. We have another person working with solar energy. Sarah's partnered with someone in our class to work with corrupt government. So it's just how can you expand and share your ideas, what worked, what didn't work, and moving forward.
I'm just going to say, like, really kudos to the three of you and Tim. This is a wonderful program. Yeah, Mr. Smith, that fosters such an environment that these young kids are just so mobilized and passionate and driven. That's such amazing, you know, projects. They're really, really in awe.
Your projects give us hope.
Yeah, it does. It really does.
Really uplifting.
Yeah.
The one point I would add to that is, from the idea, Melissa, I remember the original presentation, and to see the outcome, and what I was most impressed by the students is the ability to deliver and communicate your concepts. So the elevator pitch worked, and it was very good.
Nice work, nice job.
And you deserve so much credit for being so forward thinking about this program. It was at the beginning just an idea and a risk, because it's something very different. But at the end of the day, I think not only have we taken note of it, but really broadly in the county, I think people have taken note of it. And I've gotten a couple times folks coming up to me from other boards inquiring about the program, because it's catching people's attention because of how innovative it is. So congratulations.
And really, the students get a lot of credit because they were willing to take a ride on a program that and really, and I think a lot of them would tell you that they love it being the first ones because they know they're shaping it for others.
Right. That's great.
You know, they're designing it really with us because they're experiencing it. And that's something, there's a legacy there, that they're you know, they're building that for the next, they'll be the first graduates.
So you'll come back when several cohorts later, you can talk to the students when you graduate college and talk about your experience.
I'll say, I remember you. My walker will be all over.
And there's 60 students who are doing what they're doing.
60 is the number.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you all.
Congratulations.
You're welcome to stay for the rest, but we'll break for a couple minutes in case you want to go home.
So we have several policies from the policy committee. Some are for second read, so I'll talk about those first, and then we will go to the first read. So we're in the second read of our sexual harassment policy, and there are 3 components to it. I'm going to have Gina just go through those 3 components again, and I'll highlight a couple of the changes from the last read. There were some changes made between the first read and the second read. The first, Gina will again remind you of what these 3 pieces are.
Sure, just a reminder in terms of the sexual harassment policy that there are 3 components to the policy. The first being the policy, which is more general in nature and sets the context for the policy, and the second being the regulation, much more procedural in nature, outlines the forms of misconduct and prohibited conduct, and then the third piece, which is the sexual harassment complaint form, which really is a guide to use in any kind of investigatory process.
And so in the policy, there were a few things we changed after analyzing some feedback from our legal counsel. Everything in the policy was changed simply to clarify language and make it less ambiguous. There wasn't anything substantive changed in the policy. In the regulation, there were, again, some things changed for clarity. And a few things that our lawyer recommended taking out, so you'll see some things struck out in the regulation we discussed at the policy committee that didn't need to be in there, that he felt was restricting us. So there were some procedures that were too detailed that he said could hang us up if anyone were to file a grievance that we didn't follow procedures. He said leave the procedures a little more general. So, you know, we should still follow those. He said they're good to have as a practice, but they didn't need to be in the regulation. So that's why you see some sections there that were struck out, and they didn't need to legally be required in the regulation. And I don't think there was any changes, maybe some minor changes to the form.
So I just had one question in the regulation.
Yes.
And it's in the, I have it here, I forget what part of the regulation it's in, but it talks about, it has a sentence, except in the case of severe or criminal conduct, the investigator should make all reasonable efforts to resolve complaints informally at the school level. Right. And then it talks about the goal of an informal investigation. And my only question is, I understand the intent of that. It makes sense that you're trying to deal with an issue unless it rises to the level of criminality or it's severe at the school level. But the word informally,
Right.
is that the right word to use, or is it really just we're just resolve complaints at the school level if we can, and then if not, then it gets elevated? Is it better to not use that word informal? So I just kind of pose that as a question, maybe the policy committee, because I understand that this is one where we definitely want lawyers to weigh in and make sure.
Yeah, so when Scott is referring to page 4, if you're looking at the clean copy, and it's the top of page 4 under investigation and resolution procedure. I think that's where you're referencing, Scott.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's talking about the investigation, and Gina and I were just chatting about this, and I believe it's the second sentence then that says, except in the case of severe criminal conduct.
Exactly,
that
that's it.
The investigator shall make all reasonable efforts to resolve complaints informally at the school level.
Right.
And then it goes on to say the goal of informal investigation and resolution procedure is to end the harassment and obtain a prompt and equitable resolution to a complaint. I think there's 2 ways I interpret that. One is, do you first try to deal with it informally, and if not, follow this procedure? Or is this procedure itself the informal procedure? That's, to me, what we're confused by.
Yeah.
The way I'm reading this. So it was interesting you drew our attention to that. That didn't jump out to me before, or to the policy committee when we read that. So I'm wondering if we want to get our, go back to council and ask about that piece. It is in the, we looked it up, and it is in the model, in the NISBA
It's in the
version.
NISBA,
It's
yeah.
written the same way. Not that we should just accept it because
No,
NISBA
of course
writes it, but
not,
just we looked back, but we didn't make any changes to that section.
Got it. Okay.
So this is exactly written like the NISBA sample.
I would be curious to see what council has to say about that.
Yeah, and we could take their guidance on it.
We can certainly, I could look that up, and then we can talk to council and then bring it back. I think we'll have a policy committee before then, but if not, we can come back to the board. So if you like that. Yeah.
Good catch.
Yeah, I thought that was a good catch. Thanks, Scott. So we'll do that, and then any other questions on the sexual harassment, any of the 3 pieces? And then the other 2 pieces, let me find my notes here. We have 2 other policies for a first read. The first is on public complaints, policy 1400. This policy, I go through a series of policies that are more than 10 years old. So I'm looking at policies that we haven't revised in 10 years, so this one is over 10 years old. NISBA did have an update recently, and the main update for this was including complaints regarding Title I. So basically, it's complaints that if we violated a federally funded program, that we have to have a complaint procedure in there. And this outlines those complaint procedures for Title I if we violate some Title I program. For example, academic intervention services that are funded via Title I funds from the federal government. And then in the process, we also updated some other language to streamline the complaint process. And Scott, I think you had
so the one question I had on the public complaints one, 1400, is should we add a clause or a sentence that just makes it clear that there could be certain circumstances, not too often, but there could be certain circumstances where someone that's making a complaint might want to come to the board
And not to
the superintendent. And so maybe we say something like superintendent or board president as appropriate, something like that, just to make sure it's clear if there is that odd situation where it may be more appropriate for the board initially, then people know that that's a procedure that they
The
follow.
sentence is, if the resolution on this level is unsatisfactory to the complainant, the superintendent of schools may be contacted. So we're thinking that we should put the superintendent or board president may be contacted as is appropriate.
I'd be fine with it, that makes sense.
So if that's okay, we can make that recommendation for the second read. We can put that in for the second read. I think that sounds appropriate.
Yeah.
So that's in that bottom of the second paragraph. The second to last sentence we will modify to read it. The resolution on this level is unsatisfactory to the complainant. The superintendent of schools may be contacted. The superintendent of schools or the board president may be contacted as appropriate. And then we could take out this that last sentence, I believe. I don't know if we need that. Would that be true? If appropriate, the superintendent shall refer the issue to the Board of Education. We could take that out.
No, we do need that.
Yeah, we do, because if it goes to you, and if it's appropriate, it comes to us.
It
Yeah,
comes
that
to
makes
us.
sense.
Okay.
To leave it in.
That's right. We'll keep that. We'll just add the one change.
So let's see, from procedural, anybody else have any? So we can, I guess, get a motion to approve the first read of 1400 and 5030, but then on the sexual harassment policies, so we don't need a motion because it'll come back again as a second read. Is that right? Yep. Okay. So motion for 1400 and 5030 for to approve it being a first read. All in favor? Motion carries. All right. On to the calendar.
Gina.
Calendar makes me smile.
Me too.
Makes you smile.
That's the best part. Other than Global Scholars.
That's good. So after the last meeting, there were no revisions at our January 15th meeting, so if there are no additional concerns or questions, we're recommending that the calendar be approved.
Anybody have any questions, concerns? Don't like 2 weeks in December?
I love 2 weeks.
All right, take a motion to approve the district calendar. Second, all in favor? All right.
Now the public will be really happy to know.
Book your flight.
Tomorrow morning I will send it out.
Please read it out.
And so,
on our social
You
media.
know, obviously there's going to be problems and questions with the end at June 26th, so I think that'll probably be in your letter explaining that, I guess, needs to be found out.
Yes, that's based upon what the Regents tells us.
We have it this year too.
Oh, so that's going to happen
I know
again
that
next
summer
year.
camps
It
are
is.
working around
This
it.
year's even worse.
Jen, you send it where? Because I've been being asked about that.
I'm going to send a blast to the community
You
with
send
the
a blast,
calendar,
okay.
yeah. Yeah, and anybody who's, you know, you'll get my blast before you see this live.
Is this tight Regents exams, 6
So
to
that-
6 to Wednesday, 6 to...
That's the administration. The June 2nd exam it's an isolated date, but that's the first administration of the U.S. history, the revised region.
Oh, it's this, okay. Sorry.
Counts as a-
Demonstration last month.
Yeah. Yep, got it.
I know, I had to write it twice.
June graduation's before
Sorry about
school
that.
ends.
Yes.
It always
Thank
is,
you.
yeah. And I forgot though, do the seniors, they'll be done by then. They're done by then.
They're on
Yeah, it's like
internships
region.
for those
Right,
last
right,
6
right,
weeks,
right.
so they have finished with internships by that time.
So
And
there's
the
no
Regents don't
regions.
have them.
No,
We really don't have any
Seniors
seniors.
very-
Very,
very
rare.
rare.
Okay.
Just a quick question. I know
Yeah,
this
very
year, the
rare, right?
8th grade moving up ceremony is after kids, a majority of the kids are going to camp. Is that
That's
going to
for
happen
this-
again?
This year.
This year, but
And
could we
next
take it?
year, we're considering that when we're looking at the
You are,
calendar.
okay,
Yeah.
that's fine.
I can't make any promises because we
Yeah.
have to see how things line up, but that's definitely a
Thank you for being
consideration.
I appreciate that. We
Yeah, because the
appreciate
kids
that.
still have to come to school after that. They're not
Yeah.
seniors going.
No, they're not. They're not, but
Our
they're,
camp is busing them back. They're coming for the first camp, and busing them back.
yeah. And our,
That's just what we want, kids just commuting back and forth to camp.
From Massachusetts.
You know, yeah.
our camp is
That's not what we
starting late.
want. Right.
All
We
right.
got to accommodate.
But out of our hands, it's good for the public to know that the end of school is determined by the Regents'
Right.
date that they give us. And that actually sets up our entire calendar for the year and gives us the number of days that we would have over those holidays in order to have enough calendar days.
Lots of board committees.
On to board committee duties and responsibilities. Well, this is the last of our committee duties and responsibilities. The last 3 are the roles of the policy committee, the Westchester Putnam School Board Association liaison, and West Pud Legislative Action Committee reps, and the NYSBA delegate at the annual business meeting. So I'm not sure if anybody has any comments on the language of those, or if we've been sitting on this language for a little while, so I think if anything had needed to come up, it may have, but if anybody has any last minute questions or adjustments, other than that, we will keep these the way they are. So for anybody who's new to this concept, we really reviewed as a board last year the number of committees that we had and how we might reshape those committees, and this year what those committee descriptions have been. And I think that that was a great activity for all of us because it gave us all a very clear definition of what those roles were. And it also supported board involvement in a lot of different parts of the school district, which I'm happy about. So thank you for that. And
On to site-based.
on to site-based, 11.1.
Yeah, so site-based team, you have in your packet the mid-year reports from each building. So as a reminder, we do have 2 meetings district-wide where we come together K-12, but each building has a site-based team and they work on goals every year. And the goals are aligned to our character education goals, or also every year we have a curricular focus, and this year we're looking at social emotional learning. And our district-wide meetings have been focused on social emotional learning. And I just want to highlight two things in the mid-year reports. First is in the WAMPUS report, where the principal, Peggy McInerney, has been holding community meetings with each grade level once a week and once a month with the entire school. And that is focused on her goal of helping students develop respectful ways to communicate with each other, teaching them to be responsible to the community. And those meetings are just amazing to attend. I know Jen and I have been to several of those, and Gina, we've seen these meetings, and Peggy will be discussing different issues with students, and she'll make them stand up and talk to each other. And Peggy knows every kid by name, and we'll call them the kids by name. And you just see how it's starting to shape the culture at WAMPUS. It will be a slow process and take some time, but Peggy's vigilant about having these community meetings, and it has a really great feel to it. And that's part of her goal of developing a respectful community at WAMPUS. And then also at the high school, I just want to point out, I've been working with and talking to our high school principal, Mr. Walsh, a lot about his work with Challenge Success and his steering committee that he has. And tomorrow night, some members of the steering committee will be coming and talking to the Education Foundation and talking about their work they're doing at the high school. But we're often asked, as we're learning about, and we're now in our second year of doing some work with Challenge Success, I will hear both students and parents ask what things are happening now. Now, some things do take time to address and change over time, but you'll see in your packet a list of activities of things that they're either working on in the process or some things that they have done, including this I Wish campaign, which the students will talk about tomorrow, where they talk about really hearing the students' point of view of what they wish. For example, I wish my teachers knew blank about me, or I wish my teachers knew this, or I wish my parents knew this. And that's really been helping the steering committee with this really rich data on things that are really going through kids' minds that they need us to know about. And that's starting to shape some of the conversations at the high school. Another piece with this is pointing out, for example, the elective course Wellness for Life, which is a new elective through the physical education department that's happening now. I'm going to go visit that soon, but I've been hearing some feedback about it, that kids are writing emails to the teacher saying how much they're enjoying that class. And so I said, come invite me, I want to see what's happening in there. That's an example of a course that's taking place where we're trying to teach kids about wellness through the physical education program as an elective. And then you see a lot of other things we've been doing in our presentation last night by Denise Pope was an example of the effort to reach out to students and community to start talking about the college process. Another thing we want to address and take on with helping people understand, lowering some of the anxiety around student anxiety around the college process. So a lot of things happening at the high school. It's raised the awareness amongst the faculty, and it's a conversation that they're talking about, and it'll shape some of the goals at the high school next year. So it's a very active year at Cycles.
Not all students are taking that class, and what was interesting is when we were meeting with the 10th and 11th graders at Denise Pope yesterday, a student said, I really wish we could have a life skills class that teaches us like the real things we need to know about living in the world. And I think that we do have pockets of that, but I think that this course particularly hones in on that. I don't think the student was talking about teaching him how to do laundry or but the real life skills of, you know, how do I communicate, how do I network, how do I manage my whole self when I leave this school and I relax, maybe go off to college.
Tattoos on your face.
Not.
You're going to have to go on job interviews.
And I do believe a lot of this comes up through curriculum. When you hear these students talk about managing these really difficult projects and have to overcome some of the things.
Extraordinary.
When someone says, I've been stage fright my whole life and this is helping me overcome it, you can have a course on that, but I think you learn it through rigorous academic programs where the course isn't just focused on the content, but gives you the space to deal with those things.
Project management.
Well, so you see other people do it, it becomes more comfortable.
And as you become more knowledgeable on the topic, you feel more comfortable speaking.
Exactly.
And because there's a reflective component to it, they're acknowledging this is happening in their lives. I set a certain goal, then I have time to work on it, then I assess it. So there's a metacognitive piece to that.
Yes.
And I think the kids' environment are so lucky. They're introduced to it in their earlier, schools as well. I mean, they have the Person of the Year project they do, and have to publicly speak, and in WAMPUS as well. They, it's amazing. we prepare the kids. So.
I've seen this in science research, I'm seeing it here, and I'm seeing it in other classes that are project-based, where we're making the skills they're learning explicit. And when students can identify, I'm working on how to present, I'm working on my communication skills, I'm learning how to speak about issues in public on the fly. Those are, we're trying to identify it, then it makes kids more confident in that. When in some classes I think we've done, and I'm guilty myself as a math teacher, not making those things explicit to kids, but just expecting they would be there already. Now what we're saying is, no, you have to learn these things. And we have to talk about them in real time, and they're going to help each other. And I like how, I didn't know the teachers were doing this, but the kids are looking, they don't call it a classroom, they call it their workspace, their office. That's really cool. I don't know if you caught that, but
I did. And I
didn't know they were doing that till I just heard it this evening, and I think that's really interesting.
Is it a traditional classroom that they're in, or is it more like?
So most of the classes are meeting in that tech lab next to the library. This year, because of scheduling, a couple of the sections are in a traditional classroom, and they're not happy with that. The teachers teaching in the classroom don't like that. It changes the environment. So we're going to try to think about space and how we can have some dedicated space like that room and some other spaces that are just designed almost like the science research room, where this is a space where it's different than all my other classes.
Global scholars in science research do exactly what Denise Pope said you're supposed to be doing. Let them be passionate and love what they're doing, and they're going to be great at it.
And make it project-based, and have different types of grading systems. All that stuff is, you're seeing it in these types of classes.
Normally you wouldn't get to even think about being interested in this kind of thing at high school level.
No.
Not if you're checking off boxes and, meeting.
That's what I said to Robin. I said, when I was in high school doing research projects, it was just, just get through it. Just get, do what you got to do and get great.
But I think it's giving kids time to focus on it, like Kate, right, is the first student? Sarah was talking about the books that she read in her English class and how she was making a connection between those books and what she was doing. So I think that class gives her the opportunity to make that connection, which, sometimes our courses, we try not to, but they're taught in silos a little bit like that.
It's the power of interdisciplinary work. Is kids
that was the kid, though. That wasn't the program.
Yeah.
It was letting her reflect, which allowed her to bring that other stuff.
And Tori talking about, I've always been interested in architecture, so I wanted to find something around architecture, and she's making a social connection to architecture, which is really incredible. And so year one is really about, you look at these units around these topics, and we're teaching kids how to look at things from complex points of view and how to do research in these areas. And as they're exploring that, they start to identify areas of their own interest. We also, one thing didn't come up in here, is they also integrate current events. And every week every kid every week has to do a current events presentation. So they'll start a class, they'll walk in, and some kid will just say, so I'm going to do my 3-minute presentation on something current. And the other kids will ask questions, and it's an opportunity to just keep bringing up current events so that that's part of the course as well. I don't think that came out today, but I was in a class once and that happened for just a minute, and then kids talk about it, they engage for a few minutes.
Is it about their content?
It doesn't have to be, but it could be anything. Yeah, it could be anything.
So
that
it
they're
forces
just
them to read the New York Times every once in a while.
Yeah, and I found it was really interesting because they walk in, they just talk about it for a few minutes, and they go on and start their workspace. It's like if we started every workday with, hey, did you read that article? And it gets them thinking about some new issues.
Which we do. And
then just like science research, when you go in, and so kids have their study really deeply, what they know, but they're hearing all their classmates' topics, so they learn a broad range of a lot of stuff. These kids are having that experience too, where they're learning all of these different topics and get to hear these diverse points of view. And you heard Riley talk a little bit about the political nature, which we try to approach it from an apolitical point of view. Politics will come in, people's belief systems come into it, but he was challenged to think about it from a different political point of view, which is nice to have that forum where it's not about trying to argue politics, but arguing, just trying to bring your own passion to it and argue from different ways.
But seeing other people's perspectives too. I mean, he was taught.
He learned to think about things that way. And if we can teach kids to think things from different points of view and be open to other sides of issues, I think we're doing it.
What's also impressive about it is that the academic rigor is still there. Like it's sometimes schools bring in these feel-good programs, and they're fun and they're interesting and the kids get something out of it. But in terms of evaluating the program and how do they fit it, I mean, you know, I know this is taboo after last night, but ultimately, how do you fit it into your college resume and your you know, how do you grade it? You want to make sure that that academic rigor is still there, and it sounds like it certainly is there.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The whole concept of technology freeing that up, the reason why maybe those classes weren't available and why we haven't involved is because we didn't have the time. It took us that long to research a project, where today, with information being pervasive, now it's about, you know, taking it to the next level. I mean, as far as grading, I mean, to have 5 high school students be able to articulate their projects, to me, those were the A grades right there, to their ability to communicate that, and you know, super impressive. So.
It was very intellectualized, the way they spoke, really remarkable for high school kids, really.
Yeah, and I think we heard that from
carrying on conversations about these topics in other languages.
Come on. Because you have Miss Stahl as a teacher, that's why.
Yes,
It's great. Yeah, and that's ever evolving. So to me, I think we're on the right track with what we heard a lot from the Challenge Success, which is engage kids in things they're passionate about. And some of the other stress and anxiety, while it's there, we help them manage that. And that's a life skill. We can teach kids to manage large projects, to be organized, to learn time management, be able to communicate issues. I think we're doing something really great for them.
Tim, that
Thank
was
you.
an absolutely outstanding report.
Thank you. It's so amazing. These kids are so awesome. I love going in their room all the time.
Yeah, I always feel like you shouldn't get paid when you have to do that. That's so much fun.
Don't. I know. I learned so much. I'm like, what? I want to learn about that. Tell me where to go. What's your website? I'll donate.
Happy place.
It's really
Great.
Would you guys still do the survey with college students
We do.
to see if they're, I can't wait to see municipals with now how they learn comparison to life.
And I'm hoping we can survey these kids a year out as well, particularly targeting them. So we are designing a survey for these students now. I might have mentioned to you, we brought in this organization called World Savvy, one of our partners, and I just saw it come in my email box this evening, is a draft survey. So they're helping us design a survey to give these students and also their parents. And then also all 9th grade students we want to survey about the types of skills and dispositions we're looking for to see where they fall. Because I'd like to survey for multiple years to see what the outcomes are of this program and if they are what we expect.
That
Try
makes
to
sense.
get some data on it. So we're looking at that as a benchmark.
But for college readiness also?
And then I would like to, I would love to survey these students a year out and find out. We have some graduates who took the year 1, but it'll be interesting to follow these
Just to
kids who
see
have
if
been
it
through it for 3
changes
years.
from.
There's a big difference from year 1 to year 2.
I'm sure. A big difference.
Yeah.
Do kids
And-
drop out? Is there a dropout rate?
Yeah, we didn't. We had, so I think we lost about a dozen students, but some were seniors who took year 1 as seniors last year, and then some had conflicts because of some singletons, like a band class or something that was only a singleton, so that was tough. But the fact that we have, the last I checked, which was last week, 80 students interested in year 1, and that's 40% of the rising 10th grade class.
And right now they have 60 in all 3 years combined, right?
They have, well, it's just 2 years right now. We're
Right.
only in the first
That's
2
right.
years, and it's about, I think it's 60 in year 2, right?
Yeah, that's what I think too.
I think we have 100 students in year 1 and 2 combined.
And if you look at it as a percentage of students that aren't going into the science research track, it's probably the hundreds of them.
Exactly.
It's a really big number. So.
And we've always wanted to bring something into another side for the kids who weren't interested in the deep science as much. This is sort of the flip side of that. And so you start to hear their projects. We think service could be one opportunity. We're looking at whether they do an internship, maybe they write a research paper. We sort of designed this, we wanted it not to be as prescriptive and to be a little more flexible. We wanted it to sort of have a wide net.
Robin and I were saying that there's definitely, there were a couple that's solar energy and.
Yeah, there are some science.
I'm
in
meeting
there.
science student in a solar
Economics,
energy
yeah.
company next week, a different student from Global Scholars who is talking about solar energy.
But we were saying how you could have a project similar to that in science research.
Yeah.
from a
Right.
different perspective.
Yeah, you could.
More of a
There's
STEM.
one about like,
Right.
Are you going to incorporate economics into that? So this,
You can't.
You can't teach
As the economics
Econ.
are elective. Yeah, I don't know if we'd be able to hit on everything. We
I
could
know
look
you
at
did
that,
it in
but
other classes.
we did in other classes.
Well,
but
you
it-
could make it like I don't even know if you could, but it would have to be a full year program where you
kind of get a half
Maybe the
year
first
credit of
year.
econ in there.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? That's how they do it for.
We have been looking at trying to, how can you free up time in a kid's schedule? So we are thinking about ways we may be able to like have this course count as one of the English courses, but we're not sure if that can work yet. We want to go through it a few years to see if
The hard piece too is if it's an English course, it has to be taught by English teachers.
the certification becomes an issue, and because we would like to be able to free time up in the schedule for kids. But we'll see.
Looking for
how
a
this goes.
longer lunch
Mm.
for these kids.
True.
So,
Thank you, Tim.
thanks for the time.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's been awesome.
Fantastic.
Superintendent report.
Superintendent report. So I went to a training the other day on something called substantial equivalency. I'm not sure if any of you have heard about this, but I guess there was a law since the 1940s that schools everywhere have not known about or adhered to, New York State education, that a superintendent is supposed to go in and evaluate parochial and non-public schools in their school jurisdiction, make an assessment of these schools, not just their curriculum and their programs, but also the physical structures of these schools. Make a recommendation to my board to approve that this school has substantial equivalency in education to Byram Hills. And then submit that to the commissioner with all of my backup data that I collect from the school that I go to.
And some private schools are accredited on their own, but many aren't. So it just depends on if you have one in your jurisdiction that's
Right, and you have some schools where 98% of the day it's taught in Japanese. I mean, I'm not sure what superintendent in that town is supposed to go and be able to qualify whether they have a substantial equivalency. So there are a lot of legal issues to me. You could have a case where, let's just say I did that. I went to a school in our area and evaluated them and brought it to the board and gave you sufficient information. And then a parent of a child who's in that school thinks that child is not making progress, has proven the child is not making progress, yet we have stamped that school as being a substantial equivalent education. That's an issue. The building part, I know nothing about building codes. I should not be going into a building and checking their fire inspections and all of this other stuff and reporting to my board to say that they're meeting that. If any kind of issue happened with that building after we put a stamp on that, I see some legal issues with that as well. There's nothing in the language for indemnification. So, not having that language there, we met with somebody from the state, many superintendents and I, for a training. We're mandated to go to this training. We do not have to evaluate the school until the fall. The latest we can do it is the fall of 2020, and that is, if we have to, when we plan to do it, because I'm not going to do it before then. Hopefully, BOCES, although it's another unfunded mandate, which in itself is annoying, but hopefully BOCES is putting together a group that will go out and evaluate all of these schools, but we will have to pay for that, and even though it's co-ratable, whatever, but we're now paying for an outside party to evaluate. Right now it exists as one school in our district. It's like a conflict of interest. Very much You so, had, yeah. Like a charter school in your And community because it was already an education law, there was no comment period, there was nothing for anybody to respond
So
to.
it was a law that was on the books? that
In
just
the
nobody-
1940s.
Interesting. And then did something happen where
They realized nobody was doing it.
maybe we should
But this is the real
I
problem.
know, and the only way to solve this problem it would have to be legislative. right? It would have-
My personal opinion is that part of this came back and they're trying to implement this because they don't actually know what schools exist in New York State Education Department. So they said, well, some of the schools you're going to find through BEDS codes. Those are the codes that identify schools in New York State. But there are some schools without BEDS codes. So you'd really need to investigate the area within your school jurisdiction to see if there are any other schools that are existing there.
Does that count for special education schools as well?
Everything.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Every K through 12 school. So-
Every K through 12
And
school.
what's the liability also what if you deem them not to be equivalent? And
Right.
then that gets
Then I have to
published,
report,
and
that's
their-
published, I
and
have to
their
report it to the
enrollment goes down and
commissioner.
they sue us.
And
You
then
have to
right.
justify it.
I mean, there's no way out of that,
There's
and
no
you're not
win-win.
indemnified, right? So that's the good news for tonight.
We're still waiting to hear more about that. I think BOCES is really rallying to put something together, which we also have asked for an opportunity to submit our questions and our concerns about it, and for them to bring these concerns to their lawyers at State Ed to say, how are you protecting schools that you're asking to do this job? Even if we farm it out to BOCES.
Right, even if we farm it out, we still
ideally,
could
we're
potentially
still-
be responsible because we're going to be the ones approving it.
But at least if BOCES does it, it's even for every school, and they'll hopefully have a building inspector and an education.
We would hope.
Specialist. And
Right.
They'll have a team of specialists, you would hope.
Right. And the only other things I have, well, it was out there in the press over and over and over about Brent Perlman being the Regeneron national finalist, but we didn't have an opportunity to announce it here. We are so incredibly proud of him and wish him well. That is just an unbelievable achievement for him. We've had a lot of enjoyable moments celebrating that.
He's so passionate.
Yeah.
It's great.
And the only other thing I have to report about is to pay attention to some upcoming dates. This is for the public. We are announcing that we are having a policy committee meeting on February 27th, and that will also be posted through board docs and posted publicly. March 5th, we have the administrator's proposed budget. March 13th, the board is actually Thursday, the board is visiting Wampus, but March 13th, we are visiting Crittenden. And March 15th, we have a town liaison meeting. March 19th, we have budget hearing 2, and that is where we hear from technology and special education, fine arts, and Tim will talk about curriculum. And then March 20th, a visitation to the high school, and March 26th, budget meeting 3, which is athletics, operations and maintenance, and transportation. So our next board meeting, we will be full-fledged into our budget cycle. And I'm very excited to have Kelly here for that. And that's it for me.
Great.
Tim, I think you are
reported
done.
out.
That's a good segue to me. Just quickly, the governor's budget did come out last month. Good news, increase of about $950 million statewide for education. Bad news, majority of those funds are coming down to Westchester or Byram. So we're going to have a minimal increase in state aid for the next year. The governor has thrown out a lot of proposals in his budget. I'm sure you've read the paper, many different ideas, but in terms of education, he's talking about some changes to building aid and expense aid and making the tax cap permanent. So those are some things that are going to affect us. We'll talk about that in the budget process as we go forward. The comptroller came out with his fiscal stress report. He does this every year. Essentially what it is taking all your financial indicators and information that you have, and he comes up with it's basically high need fiscal stress and no fiscal stress. So happily report, probably no surprise to you, we're at no designation, which is a good thing for the 6th year in a row with the report. Bid, we are the lead agency for the Sound Shore Consortium bid, which is a bid with 7 other districts for special ed related services. So this year we're taking that over for the bid process. You saw that in the agenda today. And finally, we put out a request for proposal about 2 weeks ago for technology support services. Currently, we're getting those services from the RIC, from Lower Hudson Regional Information Center in BOCES. We're really exploring some other options with this RFP, and that's due back mid-February, February 15th.
So how many parties do you go out to for an RFP like that?
We sent it to 6, I believe, 5.
Got it. Good. All right. Any other staff reports? Board reports. The only thing I have is that we have coming up at the end of February a meeting that Westcott puts together for advocacy where the Westchester delegation, the assembly folks and the senators from Westchester come, and it's a great forum where we can give them direct feedback, and it's usually an effective meeting. It's free, it's open to everybody, so whoever wants to go to that is welcome. And I'm planning to go. That's all I have.
A quick athletic advisory report. Attended the athletic advisory committee meeting, which was very well attended. Let's see, there are 2 experts that have come to talk to the kids, Wayne Mazzoni and Dr. Delos, were very well received, talked about college recruitment and about trying to participate in more than one sport makes you attractive to colleges, and it's also good for your physical health. They talked again about the lights for homecoming and how well received that was. The kids really enjoyed it. They allowed participation for the student body to have the community come out, and they want more activities or more incentives for adults and other community members to come and attend sporting events. Kids really spoke very passionately about that. Other ways of maybe using the Twitter and social media to try to get more people to come out, more participation. They're doing Bobcat of the Month for coaches are nominating kids and athletes. That's been really great. We're thinking of doing a dance team, having a dance team up and running again at the high school. So that's been exciting. And there's a great video on Bobcat television for Dan Santora and about the weight room. He's our trainer for Byram Hills, and it really highlights how wonderful he is and so how he helps the kids train, and if anyone gets injured, he's always there to support the children. So we have another meeting, I think, Friday, right? Yeah, so we'll have another.
And it's important to know, too, our athletic trainer works in collaboration with our district doctor.
Yes.
Like this is a connection that's important to us.
Absolutely.
And he's great about communicating with them.
Yes, and there's that video highlights all of that. So you could check out the video on Bobcat TV. Thank you.
Great. Anybody else? All right. So communications to the board. There were two to report on. One was parent feedback related to Wampus and Coleman Hill, which was followed up on the superintendent. And then the second is that I'm very pleased to announce that we owe deep gratitude to Ted Virtue class of 78. And we got a communication from the boosters, and the co-presidents of the boosters informed us that Mr. Virtue made a $100,000 donation to Byram Hills, the boosters, and that money will ultimately go to the athletic program. And that is just such an unbelievably generous and substantive donation that will positively impact athletics at Byram Hills, and to that we are grateful. We love our athletic programs. We want them to continue to prosper and grow and be an important part of student experience, and this is one way that will certainly help with that, with that goal, no doubt. So we definitely are very, very happy to hear
and
that.
I spoke with Ted Virtue and thanked him on behalf of the district, and he just spoke so eloquently about how his time here impacted him throughout the rest of his life. So to have him think of us and make such a generous contribution is really wonderful and extraordinary. It speaks to this community, I think.
And we also want to recognize Nat Allen, who
yes.
had a very, very important role in this whole process. Great. All right. With that, I would ask for a motion to approve the board minutes from the January 15th meeting.
Second.
Anybody have any comments, edits? If not, all in favor?
Great, thank you.
Donna, I will give you an A+.
And may I ask for a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
All in favor? Good night.
Good night.
Thank you.